We're going to change the oil on this 2005 Honda Pilot.
With a 17mm, I'll break loose the drain plug. Whenever you unscrew this, keep unscrewing it, but keep pressure pointing towards the oil pan. So whenever you get to the end of the threads, oil isn't going to start seeping out everywhere. So I'll keep pressure inwards until I know that all my threads are out. And then once I know, I'm just going to pull. And all my oil's going to go right in the pan with really not much on my hand. Adjust the pan so everything's flowing into it. Let this all run out for 5 minutes or so all the oil is drained out of the pan, and whenever you put the new oil in, we've got all the old stuff out. Next, we're going to remove the filter, and these oil filter grippers work really well. The way these work is they go right onto your ratchet, and whenever you crush down on the oil filter, the harder you pull on it, the harder it crushes into the filter, so it gets a really good grip. And originally these came with little rubber shoes on the end of each one of those, but those tend to slip, so what we did is we just ran a weld bead across each one of those and filed it down so it's a tooth, and that grabs into the oil filter. If you live in the Rust Belt, these pilots really can be a problem with rust, and this oil filter, the placement of it isn't really good. Right by the wheel where all the salty water gets thrown right up at the oil filter, you can see this one is really rusty, and we've actually had it to the point where the oil filter is rusted through enough that it starts dripping oil. Now we'll take off the filter, and you can see as I tighten it, it starts to crush down on that more. Beautiful. I'll move the bucket over so it catches the oil. And there's not really a trick here to get less oil in your hand when you take it off. Just try not to get it everywhere. It's important to check the old filter and make sure that the rubber seal is still on it, because sometimes this rubber seal can stick up onto the oil filter housing. And whenever you screw this new one on, it's going to double stack the filters and it's not going to seal. So make sure that that old rubber seal came off and this new rubber seal can seal onto the filter housing. I'll pre-fill the filter. We're pre-filling this because whenever you start the engine, you want the oil to be ready to go up into the engine and there's not any dry period where the engine's running dry. And I'm also taking some of this fresh oil and putting it on that rubber seal so we have a good seal whenever we put it on the housing. I like to tighten this about as tight as I can get by hand because it says you tighten it up and then about a quarter turn more, but really the last thing you want is this to come off on the road. So putting it on a little bit tighter is alright, and then with that oil filter wrench, it's not going to be a problem to get it off next time. If you're going to want to reuse this crush washer, you're going to need to sand out all those grooves, resurface it, and make it flat. If you don't want to go through the process of refinishing and resurfacing these crush washers, it's best just to put a brand new one on. Put the drain plug back in. These electronic torque wrenches are really nice whenever you're going to be jumping between a bunch of different torque specs. It's really handy and small. This is going to be 29 foot-pounds on this aluminum oil pan. In this case, the little black box doesn't fit, so we're going to need to grab the other one. We'll set this to 29 foot-pounds. If it feels like you're going too tight and you're going to strip out the threads, that's when you want to stop. Even if you think you have the right torque spec, you don't want to strip out the threads on these aluminum pans, and it's pretty easy. I do want to feel the torque with a ratchet just to make sure, because with these aluminum pans, it's easy to strip out those threads, and if your torque spec is a little bit off, you could either make it too loose or too tight. So it's always good just to feel it. And what you're looking for is a high rise in torque. So as you're tightening it down, it'll keep going until you feel a peak in the torque, and that's where its natural torque spec likes to stay. Right there's good. Different kinds of oil can make it seem really confusing on what to put in your car and what you can put in your car. This oil cap says 5W20, and that's the graded oil for this car. And these two different numbers mean two different things. You have 5W20, and then, like for instance, this is the oil we're going to be putting in the car, which is 0W20. And the last number is the weight of the oil. And that's the most important thing you need to match. It needs to be the same weight oil you're putting in the car.
The first number is a temperature rating. So if you were in Alaska, 0W20 is rated for a whole lot colder temperatures. It works great in high temperatures, but it's not going to get thicker if you're at like -30 degrees. This is going to do all right. We're going with 0W20 because it was about the same price as the 5W, and it's actually a better oil. It's more temperature resistant, but we wouldn't say want to go up to 10W because we have some pretty cold winters here, and that might be a little bit too thick, and we might start running some thick oil through the engine and bypassing the filter. So it's good to go with a lower rated oil if you're able to do so. Pour in the oil. I'll put 3 quarts in and check it on the dipstick. I just put the rest of the bottle in that we used to fill up the oil filter. We'll check the level. It's always hard to see with fresh oil, but it's right below where this hash is. It's a little bit below that, so we've got another quart that we can add. The best way to pour these oil bottles is actually with the spout on the high end, and that way whenever you pour it, it's one continuous flow and it doesn't start glugging out, and that's actually what the diagram here shows. I'll put in another half quart and then run it and see where we're at.
And I can see we're about halfway up the stick.
We'll run it, and then while we're doing that, we'll look for leaks underneath the car. Now, this is a step you don't want to forget. Now we'll let it settle and check it again. Looks like it's right at the bottom of this mesh right here, so we'll need to add more. Make sure the car is level whenever you're adding and checking the oil. The manual says this takes about 4.2 quarts, and I've put about that much in, and we're not quite to the top of this mesh. And you don't necessarily want to fill this right up to the top of that mesh. You want it about 3/4 of the way up, which is where we're at. Well, the oil level looks pretty good to me. Don't forget to put the filler cap back on. And now we've got the oil changed on this 2005 Pilot.